So, fixing your movements. So what exactly is the problem? So as per the previous sessions, we're just going to quickly have a think about what exactly is the issue here that we are confronting, that we're trying to solve for. So possible issues, and there are three I have here. One is that you don't appreciate the symbolism of the various positions or movements in the prayer. And many people, we've never really stopped to think, right? What do these positions actually mean? What do they represent? Some of them are fairly obvious, but others are less so. And perhaps in appreciating all of them, we can make the connections between them. And that's something which is worth spending time on. We'll cover it in brief today, but it's worth spending more time really thinking about the significance and the symbolism of the actual positions themselves. Now, even if you do or don't know the symbolism, it's a little bit like what we were discussing before with the words. It's like even if outside of your prayer you know the meanings of phrases, nonetheless, within the prayer you can still speak in a way or articulate yourself in a way that doesn't suggest that you do know the meaning or that you are meaning what you're saying. Similarly, even though we may appreciate the symbolism of the various positions or movements in the prayer, it is quite possible, and this is a very, very common thing, of course, to move too quickly between positions. And related, it's the other side of the coin of that, is that we don't settle in each position enough to deeply experience their significance or effect. So you can have this odd kind of situation where you can be in the prostration, in the bowing position, but not almost have lost consciousness of that's the position you're in, right? Ordinarily, of course, being in that prostrating position especially is a very unique thing. It's a very strange thing, relatively speaking. We just don't find ourselves normally in that position, nor do people generally, unless for this very specific reason. But despite its uniqueness, perhaps because of being habituated into the prayer in the way that we have, we kind of lose a sense of the fact that that's where we are, right? And what that means. So that's another issue. So we don't appreciate perhaps the symbolism. We move too quickly between positions. We don't settle in each position sufficiently to really feel what's going on. Now, I really want to emphasize this actually, because you see, the salah is comprised of many, many different components and parts, as we well know. But if you think about it, it's the physical aspect of it that really distinguishes it. What do I mean by that? I mean that, look, actually, if you think about all of the words that we say, the things that we say, the vast majority of them, in one way or another, we can and do express elsewhere. So, of course, the entire standing position, which is comprised of the recitation of the Quran primarily, well, we can recite the Quran anytime, right? Pretty much. And so the recitation of the Quran itself is not specific to the Salah. It is a general thing that can be done outside of prayer and is brought within the prayer. Similarly, the words that we utter in the various in the bowing position, in the prostration, these are words, again, broadly speaking, which contain the meaning of Subhanallah, right? How perfect is God, how exalted is God. Like these, the phrases of Subhanallah, the utterances of those forms of remembrance and forms of exaltation of the divine are things that, again, that can be said in different times and places. In the sitting position, whether it is the Shahada itself, the bearing witness, whether it is invoking blessings upon the messenger, whether it is the supplication, dua, right? Again, all of these different things can come elsewhere. So really what distinguishes the prayer is these movements, is these positions, the fact that we are shifted away from our normal kind of movements and interactions and come into a ritual, into a preset form, if you like, to represent this act of connection and devotion. And so, why am I mentioning that? It's an obvious point, but it's just something, again, just to reflect about and to think about, that really what makes this unique is those movements and positions, and therefore it makes it even more important that we pay those things, these movements, and special attention, right? And don't lose their significance. And don't, despite the fact that I myself, and it should be emphasized, right? I emphasize like the importance of the meanings of the words and the things that we're saying and articulating ourselves in a meaningful way. That shouldn't take away from the critical importance of the actual feeling, the positions themselves. Movements carry meaning. So just like words, movements signify intent. Remember, what was I saying last time, right? That words, language, okay, is a vehicle for meaning. What really matters is how language takes something from our consciousness, right? Our thoughts, ideas, this kind of almost abstract realm, couches it in terms, in finite terms that can be understood and conveyed. And just as I am speaking now, a thought or an idea is coming through, right? Translating it into words, it's coming through the technology, arriving with you, and then it's imprinting itself in some way on your consciousness, right? I mean, we do it all the time, but it is, if you just pause and think about it a second, it's a crazy thing, right? And a miraculous thing, actually. And the simple fact that words, when said, how they can affect mood, right? You can affect someone's mood very significantly in many, many different ways, simply by the words that you utter, right? If you stand back away from that for a second, it's just sounds. But the point about those sounds, they carry meaning. And so that's why it's, when we're now speaking or interacting with, if you like, ultimate consciousness, infinite wisdom and intelligence of the divine presence of God himself. And then what we're trying to do is almost interact with that, right? We are, in a sense, almost invoking from that and then pushing back that meaning into that presence. Now, we're doing that with the words. And all I wanted to say is similarly, gestures do the same. Right now, for example, with my hands are moving. The movement of my hands is just happening automatically in relation to the meaning that I want to convey. It's not something which, if I just keep my hands by my sides, it's not going to change anything that I say, right? But I almost can't help it, right? It's just going to follow the intent. So there is an intent. The stronger that intent, the stronger that connection with that meaning, the more powerful, particular, the more resonance you will find in the words. And that resonance will be backed up by the gestures, because actually that imprint on your consciousness will be greater, right? Simply by virtue of these gestures, even though the gestures in and of themselves, aren't a language in this case in and of itself. It's not a sign language or anything like that. It's not symbolizing anything in that way, right? It's just another way to carry, to scaffold, to kind of give more life to the words that are being said. So the movements are really, really important, right? They go hand in hand with the statements that are being said in the prayer, and they signify intent in the same way. Now, very, very briefly, I'm just going to touch on, right, the broad conception of each of the positions and movements, so that just as a reminder for ourselves. But in the full course, obviously, and elsewhere, you will find more exploration of the details of it. But I'm just doing it in this brief time that we have together, just so we have get a broad sense of what's happening. Really important with the raising hands. Okay, we raise our hands at the beginning and sometimes throughout, depending on whether you raise your hands throughout the prayer as well at different junctures, but we all do it at the beginning, right? And that is an especially important movement because it is your first movement. And broadly speaking, the way you begin is likely to be indicative, at least, of how things carry on. This raising the hands movement, when we lift our hands in this way, the way to think about that is sort of twofold, primarily, right? And most of these things that we're saying here are speculative and intuitive. And you may or may not relate to some of the positions in quite the same way, or in this particularly the same way. That's okay. But what I do invite you to do is think about, well, how you do relate to them then. Because when you do raise your hands, what are you feeling as a result of raising your hands? Like, what would be the difference for you if you were to start your prayer, simply have your hands folded already and just say Allahu Akbar, right? God is the greatest, and then begin. What's the difference that it's making to you to actually raise your hands? Now, we'll recognize that oftentimes in our prayer, in our experience, the raising of the hands in terms of what it signifies for us, or what we are intending by that movement, is actually very little, because we have almost, again, we're just doing it as this is how we begin to tick a box, or just automatically or habitually. We're not really feeling or deliberately raising. And one of the things that I recommend with this is to hold that position for a little while. Okay, it is very common to simply raise the hands and fold them. But if you raise and fold so quickly, you will not allow yourself to feel what you're doing there. Okay, it's very hard to be intentional with regards to that particular movement or that gesture if you rush it. So to lift and to hold that position is very powerful to do that, right? And do that until the point that you feel one or two emotions, one of two emotions, or both perhaps. One is the idea of some sort of, it's a salutation. And I mean a salutation, not by way of greeting necessarily, but a salutation by way of a recognition. Very much the idea, and especially this symbolism is quite clear in the context of, especially, or it feels more uh, sort of palpable, or you can kind of feels more real when you think about it in the context of soldiers, for example. Soldiers are lined up, or they might be just casually in position, and then an authority figure enters, and then they all come to attention, and there is a salute, right? Simultaneously. And that it's that idea, it's that, so that what is that salute? It's a respectful recognition of a higher authority. Okay, so that is a significant part of what this gesturing is. Some say that this gesturing was not an uncommon gesturing in the culture of the time anyway. That's an important thing to bear in mind. Okay, that actually, and by the way, just as in the same way, other positions like the prostration. Interestingly, just as a side reference here, we know that in the Quran, there's a very interesting reference in the Surah Yusuf, the chapter of Joseph, towards the end, when the siblings and even the parents of Joseph are in prostration to him. Right, that's a really, really interesting event or moment in the Quran, because ordinarily we think that would be inappropriate, but here you have a prophet and his siblings are prostrating to him. Why? Culture of the time, right? That's it. It wasn't symbolizing godliness in that case. It was just a deep respectful, and this is something that you would see in various cultures, right? Anyway, so the point being is that there was not this kind of, it's not as if that gesture was something unknown in sort of history, essentially, right? With royalty, with kings, etc. This would be a common way perhaps to recognize the respectful recognition and then surrender. And for a more contemporary example, one I like to give is this idea of, hopefully it doesn't happen to you, but the idea, and if it does, it's probably you've been up to no good, but the idea that you're in the midst of committing a crime, right? And then the police are on the scene and you have no choice. What is it? Hands up. And that's exactly the movement that you make. And that is to indicate what? Why hands up? Why are you told hands up? I have nothing. I have no power here in this situation, right? And there's a feeling of that too, that in this respectful recognition, there's also an acknowledgement that in this engagement, I have no power, relatively speaking, right? Relative to whom I'm in front of. Now you can see, like, we've just talked for 2 minutes, 3 minutes about this one thing, right? Reflecting on it, thinking about it. So all of that can come to mind as you are lifting your hands, but it's very difficult to do that if prior to doing so or while you're doing so, you don't afford it the thought, essentially. It's just up and down, Allahu Akbar. You can see it's a massive, massive, massive difference between just saying it, swinging up and down, and really feeling that position, and then bringing your hands together and then beginning. Okay, so a significant, I mean, light years of difference, honestly, a night and day difference between that starting experience that you can have as you go into the prayer, depending on how you are really thinking about that position, right? And as much as possible, and I know it's hard, right? But as much as possible, it's this thoughtful process that makes us feel each prayer and each position in the prayer as a fresh experience, even though it might be something repeated, but it is possible to afford it that feeling of a fresh, novel experience by virtue of this thoughtful engagement with what we're doing. And almost to be drawn into that. So final thing I'll mention here, and it is for the other positions too, it's almost as if, right, almost like a peak experience of this would be that you're standing now ready to pray. And actually, you're not thinking about raising your hands, but you're thinking about the divine presence. And in deeply engaging with that, it's almost as if your hands raise involuntarily, right? Or in response to your remembrance of God and your mindfulness of God. Do you see what I mean? So it's a little bit like another related example might be that when we lower our gaze in prayer. But do we lower our gaze just because, oh, that's what we do, and again, out of habit? Or do we lower our gaze out of a conscious, like, recognition of divine presence at the beginning of the process, especially, such that it's like our eyes are raised initially, but then we think about God and our gaze is automatically brought down by the thought of God, not by just the habit or the process, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So this, again, these subtleties are very significant in how they then determine the experience. Standing then is to be at attention, right? We stand in attention, And of course, the vast majority of what we say there is the recitation of the Quran, right? We are receiving, okay? We may be articulating or listening, but ultimately we are receiving guidance, right? The words, which again carry, symbolize, and they carry the guiding effect, essentially, to help us orient ourselves, to give us instruction. That's what it is, right? It's receiving instruction. And again, our experience of Salah often isn't that way, but if you think about that standing position as I have saluted, I have recognized, I have acknowledged my relative position in this situation, if you want to say, and now I'm receiving instruction. Upon receiving instruction, or having done so, we go into the bowing position. Bowing position is primarily recognition of divine power. The name of God, Al-Azim, the majestic, the supreme, is mentioned, is invoked, especially. And from a position standpoint, the bowing position is the most unstable position of the prayer. We are in this kind of unstable, kind of quite awkward position, relatively speaking. So whilst the prostration is more humble, it's more grounded, it's more stable, it's more fixed. The bowing position is one which sometimes, if we're tired or, what have you, we can just sometimes feel we're sort of a bit shaky sometimes in that position, right? It's easiest position in which to lose a balance slightly. Relative to that instability is the absolute majesty of the divine presence again. So we recognize that within that bowing position. So feeling a sense of that instability, almost an awkwardness, almost, right? To have a sense of that before the supremacy and the majesty of God, again, is a powerful thing. And in prostrating, we recognize divine status. Okay, Al-A'la, we recognize his loftiness, his highness, right? Al-Azim is your majesty. Al-A'la is your highness. Exactly the same words in English that we use for royalty, right? Your majesty, your highness. Recognition of divine status, so his loftiness. We are in the lowest position, he is in the highest position. We are in a situation where our minds are subdued and our heart is raised. Okay, we are grounded into the earth, okay, in that same earth to which we will ultimately be returned. So there's lots of different things to consider, okay, within the prostrating position. It's a recognition of that loftiness, of that status. So again, to feel again that low position relative to God's highness, his status, again, is important. And then the sitting position, which is usually my favorite to talk about often, because it's one of those which I think is quite overlooked relative to these other ones, which are more, significant or feel more significant symbolically. But the sitting position, which is the final one, is essentially being at rest, being at ease. It is, relative to all the other positions, the most casual in a way, right? Relative to standing, to attention, bowing, prostrating, these positions have more a sense of rigor around them, right? And the rigor, the humility. To sit is to be at ease, and even in human interaction, it's similar. When you're standing with each other, there's more of a formality, right? And when you are received as a guest in someone's home or even in a meeting, you stand. When the formalities are over, oh, take a seat, right? Be at ease, sit. Similarly at home with guests or what have you, right? So the idea now that you are at ease in the divine presence, okay, there's a feeling of, and it's a position where there is a lot of the words of peace are mentioned over and over again in different ways and in different contexts. So there is a feeling of being at ease, having gone through that process, that you feel an ultimate, and the idea that the prayer ends in this way, because you see, just always remember to be a pondering person, generally speaking, right? Like the key to that is, why is it this way? It didn't have to be this way. You want to ponder the Quran? Why did God say this? Why didn't you say that? Right? You want to ponder life? Why is it this way? Why is it not that way? Right? You want to ponder the Salah, the position? Well, why does it end in the sitting? I mean, why didn't it start with a sitting? It could well have started with a sitting, right? And gone the other way. But there's a significance to that ordering that finishes you in a position, in a relaxed position, relatively speaking, which is how, frankly, how the prayer in many ways could end, right? Like the feeling that we should have, sorry, when it does end, is a feeling of being at peace, that everything has been almost recentered, reordered. And through that round and round and round that we go in those positions, and then you come still, right? And you are hopefully in a calmer, more settled, and more energized place. So there's a lot going on, right, in this round and round. So why so many repetitions? Okay. I think what I've mentioned, a lot of us, we get this. Now, you can reflect on the extent to which you really feel and experience it in the prayer itself, and that's something to work on, and we'll talk about that. But why the repetitions? The repetitions, to really, it's everything that we do everything that we do that is meaningful to us almost requires a sense of repetition, either within the activity or across activities, right? Consistency is what in a certain activity brings compounding gains. A very useful analogy for this, and you may experience it depending if you depending if you're going to take this seriously or not, is you working out or going to the gym, whether it's in the gym or elsewhere, right? But repeated exercise, where it could be through sport, could be through just, whatever it might be. But the idea that there are reps and there are cycles, right? And you push and you elongate and you intensify and you extend and you keep going and the repetitions build upon one another. You have compounding gains, right? And if you do some, if a person who's looking to strengthen themselves physically speaking, everybody knows and acknowledges by experience or by intuition that somebody who rigorously repeats the exercise in a particular format, in a particular way, with proper technique, consistently day in, day out, or whatever the intervals are, but does that consistently over a period of time, that there is no way to outdo the result of that by ad hoc exercise. There's no way to outdo the result of that. You cannot beat that as a combination, right? So even going in really intensely for periods at a time, but then dropping off, like you can lose, the gains can be lost very quickly, right? If it's not maintained, if it's not kept up. So the repetitions, they reorder. Now, there's many ways to think about this, right? We accumulate a lot of, content, signals, distraction, things that distract us from the straight path, things that distract us from God, right? We fall into mindlessness. These repetitions and cycles reorder us. It doesn't take just one just to bring us back to where we need to be, but it takes consistent cycles. And so that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is the way that it symbolizes all of the processes that take place in life upon which we depend, right? We're not complaining about the fact that the Earth continues to spin on its axis, but it does. We're not complaining about the water cycle, which continues to function in such a way as to bring rain and to bring vegetation as a result, etc. And we're not complaining about our respiratory system, which again is cycles and repetitions, our heart pumping, the blood circulating, our digestive system, our entire body functions in that way, right? كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ, right? In the Quran, Allah says, Surah Yasin, in the relation to the planet, sort of in the cosmos, right? Planets and planetary bodies, generally speaking, everything, what does he say? Everything swims in its orbit, right? Flows in its orbit. So there is something symbolic about how we are almost in a way that's appropriate relative to the human body, just bringing about an expression of an orientation or a cycle or repetition in the remembrance of God, just as what we consider to be inanimate components of ourselves within the earth and in the cosmos are all cyclically moving and repeating. There is also, of course, the image of the angels, similarly bowing, prostrating, circulating, circumambulating as per the tawaf, etc. Right? So when you can be mindful of that, that's also a very powerful thing to kind of think about, the way that you are aligning yourself with existence, okay, in the actions of the prayer. This is also very, very useful and significant. Now, hopefully you can appreciate already, just as a result of what we discussed so far, that there's a lot here that once we really get this, and it's exactly as I said in the first session, I think this is so important. I mean, I've been reflecting on it more, since that first session, especially, and just for myself and just generally speaking, right? Like, honestly, the more that you can get this, feel this, experience this, you will be able to do what we spoke about in that first session, which is to transcend that sense of obligation when it comes to prayer, meaning transcend that sense of, I'm doing this because of an external imposition, right? Which, frankly speaking, right, is absolute beginner level, right, of where we need to be. And many of us have been there for many years, in fact, right? That's what's really driving us, is the sense of external imposition, which is then coupled with the fear, right? Or if we don't, then there's some bad consequence out there, rather than, and the opposite of that is what we're trying to speak about now, which is an experience of the prayer that is so powerful, so aligning, so calming, so energizing, so centering, that to miss it is its punishment, which you feel in the moment. right? You would feel its absence. You feel that that you need this, right? Just as a person, to bring it back to the gym analogy, just a person who's serious about their physical health, like people who are serious about their gym stuff, right? They really dislike it when they miss a session or something, miss a session, right? And they really protect those kind of moments, right? But the people who are really keen on that kind of thing, like the breaking of the habit causes them a great frustration, right? And an upset, and it brings things out of balance. Um, it's a similar kind of thing, right? It's like, it's not because that person needs, because now I'm afraid that because of some external type of, I'm doing this because of an external imposition. No, it's that intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. When you're intrinsically motivated to something, and then an omission happens, or something happens in such a way that doesn't allow you to engage in what you are intrinsically motivated by, that causes an automatic upset within you, or a dislocation, which you then feel that you need to address. This becomes very powerful then, right? On I need to pray, okay, or need to be in salah, need to be in the divine presence. I need to shut off from all this other stuff and engage in this unique set of actions and words and expressions, and therefore thoughts and feelings that bring me back to what it means to be human, right? Like that is the because especially nowadays, there's a lot of what else is going out there, which is frankly dehumanizing in many ways, in the sense that it takes us away from our true nature, from our essential nature, from our um, from our souls, our deep innate consciousness of God, right? How many are the distractions and the false gods and the messaging and the messages out there which are fracturing us in all sorts of different ways? So the prayer is what brings us back to that, and that's once you have that sense of that sweetness of that prayer, which is very much experienced then by as a result of these movements, etc., then uh, it becomes something that you can't do without. Now, this is what we want to address finally before some couple of practical points. Then we can have any questions or comments. Right? Is a speed issue. So this is just to symbolize the fact that speed is not what we're looking for here. The idea is to carry yourself in a calm, graceful, and dignified manner. The occasion speaks for itself, and and at the end of the day, just as with everything else, frankly, simply being mindful of God should be sufficient to allow you to flow through your prayer in a way that makes sense, in a way that is natural, that feels appropriate. You see, in one sense, of course, uh, you know, if we could be mindful to God, in an absolute of God in an absolute sense, you would never leave a prostration. You'd never get out of the position, because why should we? Do you know what I mean? Like, in one sense, if you think about it, right? There's no end of these. There's no extent to which someone can afford or communicate or express the appropriate level of recognition of God's majesty, power, loftiness, status, etc. Uh, like, there's just no end to it. And if the prostration, as an example, is the highest or lowest right way, or but the supreme way of symbolizing that humility, then in one sense, like, how could you leave it? And this is actually an important thing, right? Which is that when we come out of positions, how do we feel? Because actually bringing yourself up from prostration uh, is kind of like it's almost like a brave thing to do, you know? It's a little bit like, it's like you wouldn't break position from the standing position. When you're standing, your gaze is lowered, right? To lift your gaze at that point in time, or to break position, right, is something you would consider to be like something rude. Again, going back to that soldier analogy, a soldier breaks position, breaks eye contact, looking ahead, being on point. You break position, it's like it's going to be a bad situation, right? You wouldn't do it. So the point being is that we can't. But relative to the situation, naturally, we will flow through the salah, right? What carries us actually from one position to the next is the need or the desire to express or to be present in the next position. And at the end of it, to then re-enter into the world to carry the benefits of that prayer into our decision-making, behavior, actions in the world. So carrying ourselves in this way is where we need to be. And I think these three words are quite very important: calm, right? But absolute calm, graceful, and dignified. Okay, it is just then appropriate to the occasion. Now, to rush in a position shows unease. This is really important. So you see, and I'll mention this again later, when I'm talking about rushing in a position, it's like where your body is agitated such that you feel like you need to move. And then obviously that is associated with the quickening of the words. And a really useful example I give of this, to just remember, to think about what you don't want, is what you don't want is like, in sprint races in athletics, right? Where the position or the type of physical experience of the athlete in the sort of get set position, right? So you have on your marks, okay, they're ready, get set. Now they are tensing and stretching themselves to the limit of where they're allowed to go in that moment, and then the release comes, and then they're off, right, into the next position. So in that get set position, they are still, right? Everything and everyone is still waiting. They are completely still. So just looking at that snapshot from the outside looks like, hey, this person is still, right? Is calm. But actually in the body, there's a lot of tension, and rightfully so in that particular, sort of experience. But a lot of our experience of each position of prayer is like we're in the get set position, because in the position, we're already thinking about the next one. We're already thinking about what's coming. We're not actually in the moment right now, deeply in presence right now. And so when you're in a get set position, the athlete then is thinking about the race. I mean, the athlete here, their mind is going ahead now because they're in a position to move forward. And it shows unease, right? And so we can be still. And from the outside, it can look as though, you know, everything is fine, so to speak. But within ourselves, we may not be experiencing that way. And that's something also for you to pay attention to think about. That is your body tense? If your body is tense, right, in such a way that is moving forward, there's a big, big difference between a situation where you're completely in a relaxed state in each of your prayer positions and one where there's a kind of tension associated with rush, associated with quick communication, etc. So bear in mind, what is that? When I say it shows unease, what I'm saying is it shows unease to your Lord. And why this is so important, right, is that your movements in prayer, they reveal, frankly, let's put it just bluntly, right? They reveal the extent to which you want to be in the divine presence, to which you are comfortable in the divine presence. It is not reasonable for someone to claim they want to be in paradise and for them to rush their prayer. These two cannot go together, because the ultimate thing about paradise is to be in divine presence, right? Muqarrabin, drawn close to God. Right? For those who are not, they are veiled, mahjubun, right? Mahjubin, they are veiled from divine presence. So to be comfortable in divine presence, if and is to essentially, that is what wanting to be with God in the next life is. I mean, that is basically the demonstration of faith. It is relational. Remember, this comes back to the thing. Similarly, just like with human beings, when we're with somebody you don't really want to be with, you're not relaxed. You're uneasy. You're a bit fidgety, right? Agitated. Right? But when you're with someone that you feel a peace, calm, love, and engagement, it's truly relational, you're relaxed, right? You're at ease. You're not thinking about moving on or away from that engagement. You want to stay there. So very important, very, very important for you to reflect on and think about in relation to how are you actually feeling. And ultimately, only you know. You need to, in the prayer, outside of the prayer, really reflect on that, because it says a lot to you and to your Lord about where you're at. To rush between positions shows disrespect, right? When you're just, it's happening really fast, especially in the ups and downs, right? So between the prostrations, up and down, going down into the prostration from the bowing position and standing up, right? So how we move in these positions, there's a kind of flowing, graceful way for that to happen, or there's a very sharp, almost abrupt way for it to happen. And over the years, when I when you observe people praying, in the mosque or whatever, and you're just sitting and then you observe, not in my case, whatever, just as a, I can call it market research, for my work, right? But like when you observe, like you can see it, like, oftentimes, right? This, like, really high degrees, and very common, especially in sort of voluntary or sunnah prayers, if you like, after the obligatory prayer, the ones which people are just getting in, some oftentimes, again, just tick box, they're not really thinking, right? Very rushed, very uneasy, very agitated, just nothing's going on other than some physical movements, it feels, right? So it's important to think about that and avoid that. Now, I said this last time, and say it again: if you don't work on your prayer outside of your prayer, you will struggle. And so I want to recommend a particular exercise like I did last time. And just like last time, when I recommended the fact that let's take the words outside of the prayer, practice saying those words, right? In English, Arabic, etc. And just like be with the words outside of the prayer, where you don't have the rush of the prayer itself, or if you like especially if we're in this kind of automated mode in the prayer, right? We're outside of it, we're practicing with the words, and then we bring the benefit of that practice into the actual prayer itself. Similarly, speaking with the positions, right? And I know this will feel odd to you or sound odd. Maybe you've never had anybody suggest it to you, but honestly, I really highly recommend it. It's very, very powerful, which is simply this, is to practice 2 units of prayer without saying anything at all, just movements, no words, right? So again, I'm not trying to say that you offer this as a formal prayer. I'm just saying you go through the motions of prayer, right? But no words. Okay, so it will feel strange to you, but the idea here is because when we're in the prayer, a lot of our attention is on the words, right? The speaking. Take that out of it, and then what's left? And remember, that's the key distinguishing element of the salah itself. How we feel? How are we feeling all of these various positions? So pay attention to your thoughts and feelings. You're not saying anything, but where are your thoughts? Where are your feelings? To what extent are you now relating more to the raising of the hands? How are you holding them up before you fold them? The folding of the hands themselves, right? The actual being in that standing position. Okay. Do you feel at attention? Do you feel that you are receiving? Okay. Again, without the words, you can actually end up paying more attention or feel in your body, in your mind, right? More of the emotions that are associated with these various positions. Of course, with the bowing, with the prostration, with the sitting, etc. Give it a go. I don't need to say more about it, but the benefits of it, I think you will experience straight away. I mean, it will take you 3, 4, 5 minutes, whatever it might be, right? And this is the key thing here, actually, which is you might think, well, if I'm not saying anything, how do I know when to move? And that's actually really interesting, and that's the key of this exercise in a way. And I've written it here. So don't move out of the position until you feel fully at peace in the position, until you've connected to the divine presence. You see, in any position, right, when you move from one to the other, there's like a meeting or a connection with the divine that you really feel that you are fully cognizant of your Lord and nothing else, essentially. You're not thinking about anything else, not thinking about what's to come, anything else. You're just fully submerged, right, in the divine presence. And frankly, enjoy that, right? And then move as the inclination comes to move. But don't move until you have felt that. And you might find yourself then holding for a while. Fine, hold until you get there. And you might think all these thoughts are rushing through and feeling fine. Okay, stay there until those have subsided. And you remind yourself of what you're in, what you're doing. See yourself from outside of yourself. Okay, feel what's going on. This is the kind of filtering, cleansing, right? The return to center. It's a process. You've got to work through like sort of the mayhem, right? The fog, the storm before there is a calm. Okay, before there is the clear sky. Right? Before you feel that sense of presence very deeply. Find that. And it's there to be found. I always find this, one of the narrations attributed to the Prophet, peace be upon him, about the prayer, which I've always found interesting, is that, he said that my highest delight was placed in the prayer, in the passive. He says was placed or has been placed in the prayer. It's like a thing to be found in the salah, right? That highest delight, that highest physical embodied experience for you to have in this life, peak experience, is in the prayer. It's somewhere in there. It's like a something to go and find on a treasure hunt, essentially. You're not going to find it if you are rushing through, not thinking, just bolting through, essentially. So allow yourself the time to find it. And finally, in the prayer itself, breathe. Yeah, before you begin, breathe. Take deep breaths. Feel your body calm down, right? Settle itself. And allow for these pauses to breathe, right? And wordless pauses, especially at the start of each position. Really, I think very, very important. I've mentioned this before, I think. I can't remember if it was in this series or elsewhere, but just generally, I do try to emphasize it a lot because I think it's possibly the most easiest thing to overlook is that as soon as we start the prayer, we start talking. As soon as we get into the bowing position, we start talking. As soon as we stand up, we start talking, right? Even I was thinking about, in between the prostrations, some of you may be aware, there's some supplications mentioned in association with the in between the prostrations. Now, these are not obligatory by any means, but they're an opportunity, obviously, to say some additional things, fine. but they're also an opportunity to completely settle yourself. And I have found sometimes that there's benefit in leaving those positions free of words in between the prostration, that sitting, which is a really always the hardest for people to get right. Yeah, meaning to fully settle, because it's like, what am I doing here? You know, why am I? Well, I don't need to. What am I sitting for? Can I just go back in? You know, and it's just up and down very fast. So you really want to sit there, right? Just let it just feel settled in that sitting position. If your first prostration was any good, frankly, you will have to sit. Yeah, because if you went like it's like diving deep, right? You come up for breath almost. You don't just go back in. You breathe first. You settle yourself, and then you go back in, because the prostration is an intense position in many ways. So I'm just saying that at the beginning of each position, really just breathe. Just wait before you start talking. Feel a sense of your position, and then express yourself. And then, as I mentioned earlier, last point here, beware of artificially holding still, right? This is the point about being in that get set. So avoid the get set kind of mode where you are still, but you're like, tensing and almost about to release, jump off. It's a little bit like, sometimes you might have experienced yourself, or you might have seen others, like, say the imam, if you're in a congregational prayer, the imam has recited, right? And then some people think he's about to say Allahu Akbar, and they've already moved before Allahu Akbar because they're anticipating. They're not present, they're anticipating, right? Or he's finished the surah, it's a short surah, he's finished the surah, and he's pausing now. And you have an agitation. So the congregational prayer is another useful way to appreciate your behavior with regards to prayer. So, sometimes if you ever find yourself in your prayer thinking, why is the imam, what's he doing? That's a great indication that you are somewhere else. Because if anything, what the imam's movements or Allahu Akbar or Salam should be a surprise to you, right? It's almost like you're so deep that when he speaks, it's kind of moving you out. But, actually you were there. You're not waiting for him to say something. It can become frustrating. So sometimes people feel that frustration. I mean, let's be honest, yeah. Sometimes in certain things, you might feel a frustration with the imam, right, who's hanging on a bit. And that tells you a lot about where you're at in your prayer.